Groucho Marx was a shining light in comedy, but even he had his bad parts. He sometimes couldn't connect emotionally to his children and said controversial things. But one thing is undeniable: the man helped shape American comedy, and funnily enough, did you know someone said he wasn't funny? How was the worst singer turned to be the best comedian? We owe Groucho for how he helped shape comedy. The man was just too brilliant at dishing out humorous quips and one-liners, but he didn't reserve his one-liners for his comedies. He used them in real life, and let us tell you this, his quips were even more devastating in real life, and he didn't care who he used them on. A priest had the misfortune of complimenting the comedian for bringing joy into the world. Do you know how Groucho responded? Well, he thanked the priest for sucking the joy out of the world. Ouch! The priest wouldn't be the only beneficiary of his sharp wit. He even used them on a group of intellectuals. Don't let Groucho's comedic antics fool you. The man is pretty intelligent and also well read. He is also an accomplished author and has about 8 books that he wrote and published. His works were brilliant, and one of them caught the attention of the Library of Congress for Cultural Preservation. While that would be his highest literal honour, he had one which he thought could give him similar satisfaction. You see, the comedian loved classic literature and high art. Love is even an understatement. He revered them profoundly, and when he found a Beverly Hills club that shared his interests, he thought he found a home. The man was eager, and when the members inducted him into the club, he wanted to get into it. He was ready to start analysing classical work and exchanging ideas with the other members. The man wanted to talk about art, but the other members wanted to talk about women, and when it wasn't about women, they would love to drink and play cards. Groucho had been duped. What he joined wasn't a group to discuss arts, but a male gossip group. He decided to leave the group and planned to do so in a way that would show his utmost displeasure. So the comedian wrote to the group, and part of his resignation letter included the statement, "I would never want to be part of a club that would have me as a member." The resignation had the effect. The statement would become iconic, but at the same time it was a worrying statement. What if we told you there is a theory that the comedian hated himself? His quips, as much as it is as he used them against others, he also used them against himself. Or is it because the comedian believed that he was a sad man? When Groucho went on an interview on William F. Buckley's TV show Firing Line, he mentioned his sadness. However, not long from when he made his declaration of sadness, the man had begun to joke, and his jokes were great. Even the stiff Buckley cracked a few smiles here and there. Buckley, the ever-serious host, even blushed like a little girl. The audience, on the other hand, went ballistic. They couldn't get enough. Surprisingly, they laughed so much, considering that he said the world wasn't funny as he answered the host's questions in that same show. Sometimes we feel that the man wanted to make a fool of the show's audience and, by extension, the general public. Or maybe the reason it was easy for the man to crack those jokes, even in such a severe setting, is because he doesn't have an alter ego. Maybe the man was the same as his characters, and as a result he is always in character, ready to quip and joke. He had been doing it since he was young and continued through adulthood. It's normal if he and his stage personas or alter egos have blurred into one another. At least this is what Lee Seigel thinks, and he even believes that the comedian and his brothers, who are all part of the same act, aren't funny. Yeah, absurd, isn't it? These comedic man-chops were so legendary that they inspired the creation of the glasses with the fake nose and huge moustache called the Beaglepuss, or the Groucho glasses. The glasses were made after the comedian's face, and someone believes they aren't funny. Why would Lee think Marx wasn't funny? He said that the man and his alter ego had been fused. He does have a point there, considering Groucho was Groucho, because a story had it that he was in charge of their finances, or the grouch bag, as vaudevillians call it. It looked like Marx was strict with money, and so the name Groucho, although there is a story that claims Marx became Groucho because he was grumpy, who acted grumpily towards those around him. The same went for his brothers, who bore the stage name Gunmo and Harpo. So Harpo played the harp in real life, and Chico was a gambler, as his on-stage persona was the same. A report claimed that they had nicknames before becoming partners, and it was Art Fisher, a skilled performer, who gave them the name when playing cards. But there's the part that Groucho could play the guitar. Why didn't he call himself Guitaro or something? And even the Groucho character was that of a German, Harpo was a mute Irishman, and Gunmo was an Italian man. Also, on the blurring of personas, Lee has taken it too far. The ease at which Groucho switched his stage and real personas is a result of his great skill, not because his character was an extension of himself. When the comedian became the host of the TV show You Bet Your Life, he made it absolutely clear that he had grown past the Groucho character and wouldn't slip into it. Honestly, we have chewed, and we still can't accept that Marx and his brothers were not funny. They had energy and agility, their comedy was much physical, and it was with words. Put them on a musical and you'll see them sing off-key and dance so badly that you'd roll off your seat in laughter. Marx and his brothers would make romance look even awkward. So unfunny? That would be wrong. If the comedian wasn't funny, would Reader's Digest have sent $25 for saying something funny? No, they wouldn't. The interesting part. He didn't even say what Reader's Digest thought he said, but that statement was just so similar to what Marx would say that they didn't even bother to make their findings. The legendary comedian must have put the $25 to good use. But everyone is entitled to their opinion, and that's Lee's. We don't agree with it, though. But we do agree that the comedian's brand of humour and the ease at which he makes a joke of himself comes from his childhood. So let's explore that, shall we? Julius Henry Groucho Marx was born October 2nd, 1890 in New York City. He grew up to become one of the pace-setters of American comedy, beginning his craft as a vaudevillian, before he then graduated to silent films and finally talkies. He was an absolute legend in each of those mediums and dominated them. He was also on the radio and worked as a TV show host at some point in his career. The radio thing was a bust. Unlike being on stage and in front of the screen, he wasn't successful on radio. His radio show, Flywheel, Shyster and Flywheel, ran for a single season. But its failure wasn't because Groucho wasn't good enough. The show's producers got an unfortunate time slot for it, and Groucho himself had an eye on Hollywood. His failure on the radio, nonetheless, the man began a person that people didn't take seriously. He could insult people, and they'd laugh, thinking, classic Groucho. Groucho's childhood wasn't as funny as his acts. His parents were immigrants. His father, Simon Sam Marx, or Frenchy as his boys lovingly called him, was from Alsace in France and was a laid-back man. His mother, Minnie Marx, was a domineering woman. Groucho's mum was related to Al Schoenberg, or Al Sheen, the popular vaudevillian that people knew and loved. He was her brother, and as a renowned vaudevillian he inspired Groucho and his brothers. Or should we say that he served as an inspiration for their mum, who was the one that pushed Groucho and his brothers into the entertainment life. When the boys began their act, Al wrote for them and guided them. But before then the boys had their mother, who, as we have mentioned, was the architect of their careers. While she didn't have for herself, the woman had ambitions for her son to become like her brother. She noticed that the comedian had a singing ability and was an excellent soprano. He was also trained with the guitar and was a skilled player, but the boy had other ambitions for himself. Believe it or not, Groucho wanted to become a doctor. In another life, we wouldn't have had the wisecracking comedian, but a doctor doing doctor things. But he had to drop it. He had to drop school entirely because the family was poor and he needed to be out there working to pull his weight. And he tried to make up for his lack of education throughout his life by becoming an insatiable reader and a brilliant writer. Marx loved Horatio Alger and his classical literature. Despite his mother's ambitions, Groucho didn't go chasing the stage. They didn't have money. He needed actual work and got some entry-level jobs for workers his age. Then finally debuted in the Ramona Theatre in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He performed with the Gene Leroy Trio. The trio's leader, Robin Leroy, chose Marx as he needed a young performer. But in a typical self-hating manner, he jokes that his performance wasn't spectacular. After that performance, his mother took Groucho and his brothers and turned them into a singing group, the Four Nightingales, but they were more like the Four Failures. Their performances weren't the audience's cup of tea. They went from stage to stage, but weren't well received. They failed in the East, and as a result the Marxes moved to LaGrange, Illinois, so the boys could explore the Midwest stages. Nothing changed. The audience didn't like them until something happened. After yet another horrible performance in Texas, the three brothers began to crack jokes on stage, not minding that they had just disappointed an audience. But rather than boo them, the audience cheered instead. Like that, they knew what they were supposed to be, comedians. The brothers began to go to shows as comedians, and they began to develop their style. They became Gunmo the Italian, Harpo the typical Irishman, and Groucho the German. It was Al that suggested that Harpo be mute, as he couldn't cope with talking on stage, but Harpo did draw laughs with the red hair wig that he wore. Two things happened that could have changed the brothers' trajectory. The first one was Groucho's on-stage German persona became unpopular due to the First World War. The audience began to hate him, and he had to become the group's wise guy and fast talker. Then the second thing was Gunmo got drafted into the army for World War I. Just as the group adapted to Groucho's character change, they adapted to Gunmo going to war by bringing in another character. Eventually they began to perform on big stages like Palace Theatre in New York and got on Broadway. Groucho and his brothers had 3 amazing Broadway shows, but this was just the beginning. The brothers had become sensational, and by the time they got into Hollywood, Groucho was a pure comedic force. The comedian made 26 films, with him and his brothers being a trio in half. But did you know that their Hollywood career didn't almost pick up? You see, the first film they made didn't get released. Some say it even got destroyed. But the brothers have been through worse, and they stuck at it. Eventually they began to adapt their successful Broadway shows into films. Then they made hit films like Duck Soup and A Night at the Opera. But with Groucho they couldn't just have a normal, regular day. The man just couldn't turn off his comedic side and use it against anyone, including directors. So Marx and his brothers were being naughty, and the director of the film A Night at the Opera was frustrated. So against his better judgment he yelled, "You can't make an actor out of clay." Immediately Marx replied as he said, "Nor a director out of wood." Classic Groucho. His co-workers were also not safe, especially when they were in character. A character that suffered from him the most was Margaret Dumont's character. Margaret and the actor had excellent chemistry and ended up starring in films together. While Marx often played a roguish, sharp-tongued hustler to Dumont's stiff, dowager characters, Dumont was always there to prevent Groucho from succeeding in his antics. As a result, she suffered verbal insults from the man. But Dumont took it all in, and it turned out she did because of a surprise reason. The comedic legend revealed she didn't understand that he was insulting her. Some claim that Marx was like that towards Dumont because he didn't like women. It didn't help that the man allegedly said that he didn't like the women's liberation movement, but he got married and he had the kind of woman he liked too. The actor said he liked someone who looks like Marilyn Monroe and talks like George S. Kaufman. His marriages were failures, all 3 of them. The only loves of his life that he could sustain to a long extent were his career and love for the cheesecake from Le Bistro. The comedic actor announced to Roger Ebert, the film critic, that the cheesecake at Le Bistro was the best he had ever tasted. Pity he didn't feel the same way about love. Maybe he would not have been married 3 times. Marx's wives were younger than him considerably too. With the way he went for young women, you would think he was Dracula. He was 10 years older than his first wife, Ruth Johnson, who gave birth to Arthur and Miriam Marx. They married in 1920 and divorced 22 years after. He was older than his second wife by 33 years, and she had a daughter for him, Melinda Marx. The couple married in 1945 and divorced in 1951. It would be his shortest marriage. Groucho's third marriage lasted 15 years. He was 64 while his wife was 24. He liked his young women. Maybe it resulted from having a controlling mum, and he believed a younger woman wouldn't control him. This is just a guess. It would be interesting if the man whose films took a swipe at the cream of society had the thoughts of controlling another person. Although Lee doesn't think that Groucho was criticising the rich, the man claimed the comedian was just making fun of everyone, with no one the wiser. Marx didn't have it all. He had a horrible relationship with his children, and the boldest among them, Arthur, accused his father of being a bad father. Arthur claimed that the actor wasn't close to his children and would joke instead of being emotionally involved. The two of them even didn't see eye to eye because Arthur wrote a book detailing what it was like having Groucho as his dad. Groucho didn't like that book and threatened to sue his son, but Arthur was stubborn and didn't back down. The comedian didn't make good on his threat, and since then he and his son only spoke through lawyers. Marx didn't only lose his son but also his health. The actor was diagnosed with pneumonia, and he would die after. He was so sick that he didn't even know his brother Gunmo had died. Relatives told him the news of his brother's death, and the comedian died thinking that his brother lived. But do you know the most painful thing? No one even knew he had died. The man helped shape comedy, and because BJ's death coincided with Elvis's, he was forgotten just like that. And as if that wasn't enough, there was a battle on his estate. Do you think Groucho could have done things better with his children, or maybe as a celebrity? He would always be bound to fail in love and in parenthood. But wait, the adventure continues with a jaw-dropping twist. How did Jonathan Goldsmith outplay Warren Beatty in love? Buckle up for a wild ride as we unravel the captivating love story that shook Hollywood.